desert is never truly empty. Step too far from the beaten path and you may hear them. The whispers carried on the wind, the footsteps that don't belong to you. In the flickering firelight, shadows stretch a little too far. In the dead of night, something presses close, just beyond sight. Some say they are tricksters, others protectors. They are older than empires, older than the words used to name them, born from smokeless fire, unseen but ever present. They are the Jinn. Welcome to the Lorekeepers Library. I'm Kriss, your guide into the myths and legends and folklore that shape our world. If you love exploring the hidden corners of history, and if you believe stories hold power, then make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode. For every time you do, you help keep these tales alive, because folklore isn't just the past. It lingers, it evolves, and sometimes it refuses to be forgotten. Tonight we turn the page onto one of the most enduring legends of all time, a story whispered in the deserts of Mesopotamia, woven into pre-Islamic belief and carried through the centuries into the present day. This is the story of the Jinn. The Jinn exist in the space between. It's the unseen yet present. Unlike ghosts, who are remnants of the dead, or demons, who are often tied to religious notions of evil, Jinn are something else entirely. They are a separate race, neither angel nor human, existing in a parallel world to our own. In folklore, Jinn are said to be born of smokeless fire, a substance unlike anything in the human realm. They are creatures of immense power, capable of shape-shifting, turning invisible, and travelling great distances in an instant. Some legends claim they can whisper thoughts into the human mind, influencing choices and actions. Others describe them as builders of lost cities, able to move stones heavier than any human can live. Unlike angels, who are bound to divine will, Jinn have free will. This means they are not inherently good or evil. There are some that are helpful and even protective, and there are others who are mischievous and prone to tricks and deception, and then those who are dangerous and they delight in destruction and possession. Texts mention that Jinn, like humans, have their own societies, laws, and even religions. Some are devout and others rebel. The Qur'an, for example, is a type of Jinn believed to assign to every human at birth, whispering temptations into their ears throughout their life. In some traditions, it is said that a particularly pious person can convert their Qur'an to righteousness, making it a source of guidance rather than corruption. The Jinn are old. They are older than the stories that name them. They have been whispered about for millennia, lurking in the unseen corners of human belief, sometimes as protectors, sometimes as tricksters, and sometimes something far more dangerous. To trace their origins, we must journey deep into the past, to the first civilizations that recorded their existence. The earliest echoes of the Jinn can be found in Mesopotamian mythology, one of the oldest known civilizations in history. In Sumeria, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts, there are spirits that bear striking similarities to later Jinn beliefs. Yukuku and the Alu are supernatural entities, often described as shadowy figures that haunt ruins and desolate places. Some are malevolent, bringing disease and madness, while others act as guardians. The Lilu and the Letu, precursors the later of demonic figures, were said to roam the night, whispering to mortals and feeding on their energies. These spirits were feared, and people sought protection through incantations and talismans, much like later Islamic practices against the Jinn. One of the most well-documented spirits was Pazuzu, a winged demon feared in Mesopotamia. While often malevolent, Pazuzu could often invoke to ward off greater evils, an idea striking similarly as some Jinn are seen as protectors in later traditions. The Babylonians created elaborate rituals to either banish or bargain with these spirits, and this set a precedence for later Middle Eastern traditions. By the time of Pre-Islamic Arabia, the belief in the Jinn had evolved into something distinct. In the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, Jinn were often seen as spirits of fire and wind, beings who dwelled in the wild, uninhabited places, mountains, caves, and beneath the dunes. They were deeply tied into poetry and storytelling. Arab poets often claimed their verses were dictated by a Jinn, a supernatural muse whispering inspiration into their ears. One such poet, Al-Shafanara, a 6th century warrior poet, spoke of his solitude in the desert where the Jinn roamed freely. Another, whose poetry is among the most famous of Pre-Islamic Arabia, describes Jinn as both feared and revered, lurking in the edges of human existence. Jinn were also believed to take animal forms, often appearing as snakes, dogs, and windswept figures on the horizon. If a traveller vanished in the desert, it was often said that they had angered or been led astray by a Jinn. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, Jinn were incorporated into religious doctrine. The Qur'an states that Jinn were created by Allah from the form of smokeless fire, and existed alongside humans but in their own realm. Like us, they have free will. They follow their path of righteousness, whilst others rebel. And some of the most significant Quranic references in the Surah al-Jinn, where a group of Jinn listened to the Prophet Muhammad reciting the Qur'an and, impressed by his message, converted to Islam. This highlights an important distinction. Jinn, unlike purely evil entities, have the capability of faith and morality. The Quran also identifies Iblis, the Islamic equivalent of Satan, as a Jinn rather than a fallen angel. As unlike angels who are bound by divine will, Iblis had a choice to obey or disobey, and he chose defiance, refusing to bow to Adam. In Islamic traditions, certain types of Jinn became well defined. Among them, the Marid, the most powerful and often depicted as arrogant and difficult to control. These are the Jinn most commonly associated with 1001 Nights Tales, who granted wishes but at a price. Ifrit, fierce and cunning, sometimes vengeful. In Islamic texts, Solomon is said to have commanded the Ifrit to build his great structures. There are the Ghouls, a type of Jinn who preys on travellers, lurking in graveyards and abandoned places. This is the original word of ghoul in Western horrors. The Sila and Kutrab, shape-shifting Jinn known for deception and sometimes appearing as beautiful women to lure men to their doom. The Hadith collections, sayings of the Prophet, also warn against Jinn encounters. One well-known narration from Sahih Muslim states that Jinn inhabit unclean places such as bathrooms and garbage dumps, and this reciting specific prayers can protect against them. And the Jinn are often thought as beings confined to the deserts of Arabia or the pages of Islamic mythology. But their influence stretches far beyond this. When European explorers and scholars and colonists came into contact with Middle East and North African cultures, they recorded their encounters with these elusive spirits. Sometimes they sought to understand them, other times they misunderstood and reshaped them to fit their own traditions. From medieval travelogues to colonial records, the Jinn have long haunted the margins of European thought, slipping into Western demonology, esoteric traditions, and even literature. But how did these spirits move from shifting sands of the East to the candlelit libraries of the West? The first glimpses of the Jinn in European texts come from medieval travellers who ventured to the Islamic world. One of the earliest mentions come from Marco Polo in the 13th century. In his travels through Persia and Arabia, he describes stories of desert spirits, invisible beings who led travellers astray and whispered to them in the wind. Though he never named them as Jinn, the description matches those found in Islamic folklore. And in the same era, Christian missionaries and crusaders returning to Europe with tales of strange entities that could possess people, cause illness and mislead the faithful. Some of these descriptions bear an uncanny resemblance to Jinn, suggesting that encounters with Islamic cultures introduced Europeans to the idea of spirits that were neither angels nor demons. Now, as European colonial power expanded into the Middle East and North Africa in the 18th and 19th centuries, scholars became fascinated by local beliefs about the Jinn. One of the most influential was Edward William Lane, a British Orientalist who lived in Egypt in the early 19th century. His book, An Account on the Manners of Customs of Modern Egyptians in 1836, described in great detail how Egyptians believed in Jinn could possess people, inhabit certain locations, and even marry humans. Lane observed that many locals sought to help religious figures to ward off troublesome Jinn, a practice that is still common today. Another key figure was Richard Francis Burton, the 19th century explorer and translator of the Arabian Nights. His expounded version of the text, The Book of 1,000 Nights and a Night in 1885, went beyond Galen's earlier sanitized version, delving deeper into the supernatural elements of the story. This included the role of the Jinn. Burton's work often cemented the image of Jinn into European imagination, portraying them as both mystical and terrifying. The fascination with Jinn wasn't just academic, it also entered the realm of the occult. During the Renaissance, translations of Arabic magical text introduced European scholars to the new spiritual entities. This included the Jinn. The writings of Al-Kindi of the 9th century on astral magic were translated into Latin, influencing European mystical traditions. Some Renaissance magicians even classified Jinn as part of their cosmology, blending them with Christian and Greco-Roman spirits. And one of the most famous European grimoires, the Lesser Key of Solomon, includes spirits that bear similarities to Jinn. Some scholars suggest that this description of the demons in this text were influenced by Islamic and Jewish traditions encountered during the Crusades and later through Moorish Spain. And by the 19th century, occultists such as Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley took an interest in Jinn, incorporating them into their writings about supernatural beings. Crowley, in particular, explored Middle Eastern magic and hinted at encounters with spirits resembling the Jinn in his own esoterical practices. The colonial period brought another layer of European encounters with Jinn. British, French and Dutch colonial officers stationed in the Middle East and North Africa often documented local folklore, sometimes dismissing it as superstition and other times recording it with fascination. One example comes from Zanzibar in the earlier 20th century, where British colonial administrators noted that local healers performed exorcisms to remove Jinn's possessions. These accounts, often written with mixed skepticism and intrigue, show how deeply ingrained the belief in Jinn was and still is in many cultures. And similarly, in British India, colonial officers wrote about curials, female spirits that bore resemblance to the Jinn, particularly their ability to shapeshift and deceive humans. While not identical, these cross-cultural encounters show how belief in supernatural entities often blended across different traditions. Even today, echoes of the Jinn persist in European and Western literature. The influence of the Arabian Nights can be seen in authors like Georges Lecbourg, who was fascinated by the labyrinthian tales and unseen forces. Writers like Salman Rushdie have often drawn upon Jinn mythology in their novels, blending Middle Eastern folklore with modern storytelling. In more academic circles, studies on the Jinn continue, particularly in the relation of psychology and anthropology. Some researchers have even examined how belief in Jinn possession affected mental health perceptions among Muslim migrants in Europe, and these have highlighted the ongoing cultural significance of these ancient spirits. The Jinn have been known for a long time in the East, but they've also haunted the West, sometimes as misunderstood demons, sometimes as exotic curiosities, and sometimes as powerful forces hidden in ancient texts. From the ink-stained pages of European explorers to the secretive grimoires of occultists, from colonial records to modern fantasy novels, the Jinn are always present, and they've been waiting just beyond the edges of human understanding. In fact, they're probably even watching now. Stories of the Jinn have been told for centuries. They are woven into the fabric of countless cultures, shaping myths, cautionary tales, and epics across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. But what are the most enduring tales of these beings? And what do they tell us about humanity's fascination and fear of the unseen? Few figures in history are as deeply tied to the legend of the Jinn as King Solomon. In both Jewish and Islamic traditions, Solomon is said to have power of the Jinn, commanding them to build grand structures, retrieve hidden treasures, and even serve as spies. In Islamic folklore, this power came from the ring given to him by God, inscribed with the great name of Allah. With this ring, Solomon could control the winds, command animals, and enslave the Jinn to do his bidding. The Qur'an speaks of Solomon's vast armies, including humans, birds, and Jinn. It is said that the Jinn helped construct the first temples in Jerusalem, carving stone and diving into the ocean to retrieve precious materials. One of the most famous stories of Solomon and the Jinn is encountered with Ifrit, a powerful Jinn who offered to bring the throne of the Queen of Sheba to Solomon in a blink of an eye. However, a man with divine knowledge, possibly an angel or a devout follower, was able to do so even faster, proving that wisdom could surpass brute strength. Medieval Jewish and occult texts also speak of Solomon's control over demons and spirits, and often conflate them with Jinn. The Testament of Solomon, an ancient text, describes Solomon using a magical seal to imprison rebellious spirits and force them to reveal their secrets. Yet even Solomon was not invincible. One legend states that a Jinn once stole his ring, impersonating the king and ruling in his place until Solomon, after a great struggle, regained his power. This tale served as a warning. Even the wisest of rulers could be deceived by the cunning of the Jinn. So whether seen as builders, servants, or tricksters, the Jinn of Solomon's court remain some of the most enduring and mysterious figures in both Abrahamic traditions and occult folklore. It is impossible to speak of Jinn in folklore without mentioning the legendary 1001 Nights, a sprawling collections of stories originating from Persia, India, and Arab traditions. And one of the most famous tales, of course, Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp, a story that, interestingly, was not originally part of the Arabic manuscripts, but was added by the French translator Antoine Galland in the 18th century. In this version, Aladdin, a poor young man, discovers a magical lamp containing a powerful Jinn who grants his wishes. Over time, this tale becomes one of the most recognisable depictions of Jinn in the Western world, albeit stripped of much of the folklore's original complexities. And then there is The Fisherman and the Jinn, a story that better captures the true natures of these beings. In this tale, a poor fisherman casts his net and retrieves a sealed brass jar. When he opens it, an enraged Jinn emerges, one who's been trapped for centuries. The Jinn declares that he will kill the fisherman, but the man cleverly tricks him back into the jar, sealing him away once more. And this story reflects one of the oldest themes in Jinn folklore, the idea that they are unpredictable and sometimes dangerous but often vengeful, and that dealing with them requires wit and not brute strength. And the concept of Jinn has also influenced folklore outside of the Islamic world. In Persian mythology, Jinn-like beings known as divs were considered evil spirits and often conflicted with noble figures. These spirits were depicted as shapeshifters and manipulators, a theme that is persistent in later Islamic era Persian tales. In South Asia, Jinn beliefs merged with Hindu and Buddhist traditions. The Qur'as or Qur'as, a female spirit who appeared in Indian and Persian folklore, shared traits with the Jinn, particularly their ability to shapeshift and their connection to deserted places. And even in European folklore, echoes of Jinn can be found. Some scholars draw parallels between Jinn and fairies in Celtic mythology. Both are spirits that exist in the world just beyond our own, and they are sometimes helpful, sometimes mischievous, and sometimes deeply malevolent. But belief in the Jinn are not just things of the past. Even today, stories of these beginnings persist across cultures, and sometimes in surprising ways. In many parts of the Islamic world, people continue to take precautions against Jinn. Exorcisms are still performed in parts of the Middle East, South Asia and North Africa, where religious scholars recite verses from the Qur'an to drive out malevolent spirits. And some individuals even claim to have been possessed by Jinn, reporting sudden illnesses, voices speaking through them, or supernatural occurrences happening in the home. The scientific and psychological communities have also taken interest in the Jinn beliefs, particularly when studying how they intersect with mental health. Researchers examining cases of schizophrenia, sleep paralysis, and dissociative identity disorder in Muslim-majority societies often find that patients attribute their experiences to Jinn rather than medical conditions, and this has led to a fascinating discussion on the overlapping between folklore and neurology. Beyond folklore, Jinn have also made their way into modern media. In literature, authors like Salman Rushdie in 2 Years, 8 Months and 28 Nights have reimagined Jinn as powerful otherworldly beings manipulating human destiny. J. Willow Wilson, in their book Alif the Unseen, reimagined Jinn as powerful otherworldly beings caught between technology and magic, shaping human destinies in the digital age. In films, Jinn feature in horror movies like Under the Shadow from 2016, an Iranian psychological horror film where a mother believes a Jinn is haunting her home during the Iraqi-Iran war. In television, Western shows like Supernatural and The X-Files have also included Jinn as antagonists, often drawing from distorted or simplified versions of the folklore. Even in urban legends, belief in the Jinn remains strong. In Saudi Arabia, there are stories of abandoned villages said to be haunted by Jinn, while in parts of Africa, some claim Jinn possess certain individuals, causing them to exhibit extraordinary abilities. And for as long as people have feared Jinn, they have sought ways to protect themselves from their influence. Across cultures and centuries, different methods have emerged, some rooted in religion, others in folklore, and some have passed down as simple superstitions. Islamic tradition is well known for form protection to recite a specific verse from the Qur'an. Ayat al-Kursi is often recited as a powerful defense, as well as the last two verses, Surah al-Falaq and Surah an-Nas, which seek refuge from evil forces. And many people still believe that saying Bismillah in the name of God before entering a place or performing an action can ward off unwanted spiritual attention. And beyond religious protection, there are other old and folk practices still followed in many regions. Iron, for example, is thought to repel Jinn, just as the belief to ward off Fae in European folklore. Some cultures place knives or scissors under the pillows, believing that Jinn avoid sharp objects. And burning incense, particularly frankincense, is another common method, said to purify a space and drive away unwanted spirits. More practical advice comes from ancient Bedouin traditions, which warn against pouring hot water onto the ground, as you might unknowingly scald a hidden Jinn and provoke its anger. Similarly, it's said to calling out someone's name in an empty place, especially at night, might invite unseen presences to answer back. And whether one sees these spiritual truths or cultural superstitions, the fact remains: belief in the Jinn endures, and with it, the desire to stay safe from those who walk just beyond the reach of human sight. The Jinn have haunted human imaginations for millennia, sometimes as protectors, sometimes as tricksters, and sometimes as forces of chaos, and they're always lurking just beyond our understanding. The presence is felt in ancient poetry, whispered legend, and even modern fears. They are neither wholly good nor wholly evil, only beings of fire and free will, as complex and unpredictable as humans that tell their stories. And whether they dwell in hidden corners of the world or only in the depths of our own minds, the Jinn remain one of the most enduring mysteries of folklore, and as long as we continue to share their stories, they will never truly fade into the shadows. And so that is it for today's episode of the Lorekeepers Library. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unseen world of the Jinn. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. It helps keep the history of folklore alive and brings more forgotten stories back into the light. And if you have a legend or a piece of folklore you would love to hear explored, let us know in the comments. And as always, keep exploring the world with wonder.